This morning saw us navigate patriotism and nationalism in sport and understand how addressing mental health is a key component of developing athletes. Following closely on the heels of those two conversations is one that has, in the past 6 months, become the central talking point in global sport and human rights. To begin this tangent, we look at a subject that has put certain female athletes at the center of controversy. Hyperandrogenism is a word that is fast gaining momentum and mainstream popularity. However, few words are as misunderstood. In the context of sport especially, this is an even bigger conversation, often with very strong opinions. Dr. Payoshni Mitra, an athletes' rights activist, will now help us understand hyperandrogenism in the context of sport. Dr. Mitra?
Shall we start? Oops. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to SLPC for inviting me to talk about the work I have been doing for the last 10 years, really. I have too many slides, I believe, because how much time do I have? 30 minutes or 40 minutes? 30. So I have too many slides probably, but I was also told that it's good to sort of go through, kind of a recap of what has been happening. And I will try to do justice, in a way to sort of balance what I would have liked to say with what the last 10 years have been like for us in India, because I have worked in India. 40 minutes? Okay. Can I bargain a little more? Okay. So maybe 50 minutes? I'm joking. So, I was asked to wear sporting attire. I don't know if Roshan is here today. And I was told if I don't wear a jersey, I will be the odd man out, standing out among, everyone. But sadly, I have quite an experience of standing out. At the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Lausanne in 2015, at the hearing of, when Duti Chand from India appealed to the court, it was just the two of us who brought in some color there. And we loved it that we were standing out. And I don't mind standing out here as well. So here I am, not following the dress code. What I want to discuss today is obviously the high testosterone debate and talk about a safer playing field as opposed to a level playing field. 2009, I do see a lot of young people here, so I'm not sure how aware are you of what happened in 2009. On the left, you will see there is this report from the Daily Mail in the UK. Boy, that's some win. Golden girl to face sex test. And you see Caster Semenia's photo. There is also Usain Bolt's 2009 World Championships, athletics championships, belonged to two of the greatest athletes I have ever known. I would consider Caster as big as Usain Bolt. Sebco won't agree with me. And then you have this report from 2019, BBC. Caster Semenya says IAF used her as a human guinea pig and fears others at risk. Now, between 2009 and 2019, what happens is something that I would like to quickly talk about. I have too many slides, but I have some bargaining power, so I'll manage, I think. So the recap of the story we all know. I'm just sort of going to remind you about what was happening. Since 2009, Caster Semenya was banned for a few months, and then she was allowed to compete again from 2010 after a gap of about 10 to 11 months. And in 2011, May, the IF publishes the hyperandrogenism regulations. What does this regulation say? It's a mandatory eligibility policy for women in all events. The rationale was hyperandrogenism, that is high level of testosterone, confers unfair advantage. The regulations also suggested that in order to compete, if you have high level of testosterone as a woman athlete, you will have to undergo some kind of medical intervention, which could include hormone therapy as well as surgery. And 2014, we have Dutee Chand's case. Dutee was about to go to the Glasgow Commonwealth Games and also the World Junior Championships in Oregon in 2014. Right before that, she was dropped from the Indian team and was told that, you know, she cannot compete. And she appeals against the hyperandrogenism regulations, on the basis of which she was dropped. And in 2015, we had an interim award from the CAS, and the IF policy, the regulations, the hyperandrogenism regulations was suspended, but the IF was asked to come back with fresh scientific evidence, if they had it at all, in the next 2 years. So between 2015 and 2017, the IF had opportunity to file evidence, and Ms. Chand and her team, which included me, though I'm not a lawyer, a lot of people think I am one. I wish I was one. I wouldn't have to beg lawyers to fight cases pro bono in that case. So Chand was, could have responded if she had wished to. So I'll go to a little bit of detail about what happened in India. So in 2012, the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, Government of India, created a standard operative procedure following the IF regulations, the IF hyperandrogenism regulations, and the IOC's hyperandrogenism policy published before the London Olympics in 2012. It was titled Standard Operative Procedure to identify circumstances, female hyperandrogenism, in which a particular sportsperson will not be eligible to participate in competition in the female category. I am not going to go into detail of the SOP, but it was interesting that it did not mention any kind of, medical intervention in the SOP. We don't have time for that, I think, today. So why was this initiative taken by the government or the sporting fraternity, the people who administer sport in this country? Was it for athlete welfare, or was it to protect a kind of a national image? How do we know that? In 2014, there was this letter sent by the Athletics Federation of India Secretary General C.K. Walson to SAI, Director General at that time, Gigi Thompson, which was titled, the subject was gender verification issue. The letter focuses on the fact that Ms. Chand had won 2 gold medals in the Asian track and field. Such cases have brought embarrassment to the fair name of sports in India. I'm just quoting from the letter. Conduct gender verification tests as per the established protocol so as to avoid any embarrassment to India in the international stage at a later stage. This is what the letter says. So obviously the question I was raising about whether this SOP or all the initiatives taken by the government or the rest of the federations, etc., around this issue was really about athlete welfare, or was it about national image, is quite clear from this letter. TOI, July 15, 2014. Is there anybody from Times of India here? Times of India was the first people to write about the fact that Ms. Chand was dropped from the team. It's a leak. There are apparently confidentiality protocols which obviously were not followed, and I'm not going to get into that today. So it quoted sources said, SAI, Sports Authority of India, adopted a zero-tolerance policy for gender suspicions as India had to face humiliation at the international event in the past when 800-meter runner Shanti Soundarajan failed a gender test at Doha, Asiad in 2006 and had to return her silver medal. So zero-tolerance policy from SAI. Now then we see this 180-degree change. It required some work, but anyways. So G.G. Thompson, Director General, Sports Authority of India, who I had the opportunity to work closely with, and I'm glad that he was the DG at that time, because very few people are willing to listen to ideas which are absolutely new. So he says, about a month later, the IAF policy on hyperandrogenism is unscientific, unfair, and unethical. The medical intervention recommended to reduce an athlete's natural androgen is also invasive, irreversible, and harmful. I appreciate the athlete's courage to appeal the decision. So this comes within a month or two from SAI DG, after that zero tolerance policy of the SAI being published on July 15th in Times of India. And obviously there was some work, I won't get into the details of the work that we had to do, put pressure from international experts, my colleagues, Professor Bruce Kidd and Dr. Katrina Karkazes, who were very closely working with me at that time, and I was here in India to knock at their door every day. So that kind of, helped change a few things, but I must say that the people who were sitting at the top were willing to listen to us, which was great. It was followed by obviously the whole process of appeal at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Ms. Chand agreed to take the legal option up, which is great about her. She was just 18, and the options thankfully given to her was quit sports, take medical steps in order to reduce your testosterone, or take the legal step of challenging the regulations. And at 18, Duthi was willing to take the third option of challenging the regulations, which says a lot about her. While I said that, I must say that I think Ms. Chand has been very lucky, because many athletes have never been given that third option of a legal challenge in the past. So in 2015, on February 20th, which is a month before the hearing in Lausanne, the government withdrew the SOP, the Standard Operative Procedure. And again, I won't go into talking about it. It could make a Bollywood film, so the rationale given this time was keeping in view the available scientific opinion and also to promote fairness and inclusivity in sport. When in India do you think in a government, memorandum, people have used such language about inclusivity in sport? But anyways, So then we had the hearing, and in July we had the judgment, the interim award, which said it is not enough simply to establish that the characteristic has some performance enhancing effect. Instead, the IF needs to establish that the characteristic in question confers such a significant performance advantage over other members of the category that allowing individuals with that characteristic to compete would subvert the very basis for having the separate category and thereby prevent a level playing field. The degree or magnitude of the advantage is critical. This is July 2015. And therefore, we didn't have any regulations, and this is after several years that in the Olympics you didn't have any kind of, similar, sex testing policies or hyperandrogenism policy. None of these in the Rio Olympics. However, it was interesting to note the media campaign by the IAF around the middle distance races and Missemania. During the Rio Olympics, before and after and around the Rio Olympics, and also a conjecture about who was going to make it to the podium. And that did not only include Semenya, that also included other athletes about whom speculations were there. But, the fact that some of the IF's experts who have been part of both Ms. Chand and Ms. Semenya's cases actually raised these speculative issues on media around the Olympics. So the IIF proposes DSD regulations, and in 2017, so the IIF goes back to the court and provides whatever scientific evidence they had to back a regulation they brought into practice in 2011, so 6 years before. And they couldn't really provide, even according to them, enough scientific evidence for all the events. The focus was on middle distance races. Ms. Chand wasn't affected by the new proposed regulations anymore, and she decided to move on and compete because it was not affecting her anymore. So in 2018, April, the IF proposes a new regulations for women athletes, which was supposed to be implemented from 1st of November 2018. Thanks to Duti, who had connection with Ms. Semenya since Rio Olympics, I was able to get in touch with Ms. Semenya this time, and then we all got together. The team in Canada who fought for Duti successfully also represented Ms. Semenya at the CAS. So Caster Semenya appeals against the DSG regulations at CAS in 2018. 2019, in a majority decision, CAS upholds the DSG regulations, which was a setback for us. I couldn't sleep that night, I remember. But Caster was training the next morning. So that's how the champion athletes are that I have been fortunate enough to work with. And so here we are. We again, moved on to what was mentioned in the CAS decision as the possible next step if we had to question the decision. And Caster moved on to, appealing against the CAS decision at the Swiss Federal Tribunal. Now, I want you to note that the CAS decision, there were 3 arbitrators in the panel, was a majority decision. It was a 2:1 decision. Which is quite rare as far as I know in CAS. There were quite a few other questions raised about the implementation of the DSG regulations also, even though I'm not a fan of the judgment, obviously. But, there are issues that were mentioned in the judgment which could be taken forward. So what was the problem with the new IF regulations? Only a few events. So were they targeting someone was one of the questions asked. Were they targeting Caster Semenya, who they have been targeting for the last 10 years? submit to assessment. There was an element, whether there was an element of coercion in that. They're asking athletes to submit to assessment, and this has been the case for many years now, where free health assessment is offered by the IAF. It's a different question whether that kind of an assessment is offered because they really want to help the athlete, or is it because they want to gather more data in order to establish something that they want to. The role of the National Federation, it was interesting in Dhuti's case. There was a lot of questions raised about the chair of the Medical Commission of the Athletics Federation of India, who conducted tests secretly. No informed consent, no mention of the tests anywhere, not even in the letter that C.K. Walson wrote to Gigi Thompson that I showed you a few slides back. So that was conducted then, and yet Dr. Mandiratta remains the chair of Athletics Federation of India Medical Commission today, and is also a member of the Asian Athletics Association Medical Commission. So even though it was clear that the role of the National Federation in Dhuti's case was very dicey, I think, which probably made them add this section where they are saying that assessment would be done by the International Federation, but the role of National Federation still stays there. I mentioned in the panel yesterday that there have been one country in Africa where, kind of a lot of athletes in middle distance races were asked to undergo some tests. So, and that was that the National Federation did before the World Relay Games. It was reported in the media, and this is even after, in a way, the DST regulations say that the national federations need not actively participate in the witch hunt. They don't really say witch hunt, I'm saying witch hunt. So medical intervention proposed by the DST regulations as well, hormone therapy or surgery. And this is, mind you, not for health risk, but for competition, so that you're able to compete in sports. Consent, informed or influenced. There is a hierarchy, we know, in sport. Young athletes listening to the officials, the managers, they have a prospect in life in sports. What should they do? And often, as I mentioned, I think yesterday as well, this whole process of informed consent, when I talk to athletes about it, they don't really remember signing something. So it's such an insignificant part of the whole experience that they can't even remember if they signed something. So obviously, or were explained anything, even if it's an oral kind of consent. There could be different ways of taking consent, and I appreciate that. Restricting one's potential to compete internationally and set records. So the DST regulation says something like, well, all athletes are able to compete nationally, but you can't compete internationally. Now, how does that work? Which coach is going to coach an athlete who has no potential to compete internationally? Which government is going to provide scholarship to an athlete who has no potential to win medals for them in an international stage? So absurd ideas being proposed as part of the regulations. Another extremely absurd idea is compete with men if you wish to, or in this non-existent intersex category that they mention. Okay, so as I asked, does the new policy target Castor Semenya? A lot of experts do feel that. They found a lot of flaws with the research that the IF scientists have done. The process of creating these regulations often they never really wanted to include people from the other side of the debate, which we have heavily criticized. And also the idea of creating policies from a bubble. I have the experience of sitting outside the IOC, I was working at the studies center, and I needed to have my lunch. I walked up to the IOC restaurant. It was so expensive, and I said, oh, I should have packed my sandwich and come. And I was sitting there the next day with a sandwich bought from one of those convenies. And I was eating there, and I was sitting there and thinking of the difference, the luxury they enjoy and the bubble they sit in and decide what is going to happen to these women's bodies who live in the global south. So they have this inadequate science, which is not foolproof. You ask any of them, they will admit that it's not foolproof. They have not much bioethical concerns, obviously, and concerns have been raised. And then you have human rights concerns, and I'll probably get into that now. So the CAS decision of 2019, Castor Semenya's case, it says the arguments concerning the compatibility of the DSG regulations with various domestic and international human rights law. And here they say much of the legal opinion, evidence, and submissions focused on the issue of discrimination. It can, of course, be accepted that there are important rights to equality and freedom from discrimination, including in sport, and that those rights find reflection in an array of domestic and international human rights instruments. However, as has been stated above, the panel is faced with conflicting rights concerning the rights of female athletes who do and do not have DSD. Resolving that difficult conflict requires a careful analysis of questions of necessity, reasonableness, and proportionality. The amicus curiae submission of the United Nations and much of the expert opinion evidence did not descend to an examination of the conflicting rights and resolution of that conflict. So there is a kind of comparison between two notions here, and of a certain kind of a level playing field and the need to level the field, and on the other, these human rights concerns in the playing field. And they are sort of weighing and saying what is more important. I'll get into that a little more later. The effect of the DSG regulations on society generally was also something that wasn't something that the CAS could give in a proper answer to, and sort of try to evade that question, saying it's not us trying to do that here. We are talking about regulations. So this whole judgment has been criticized by the World Medical Association, has reiterated, the World Medical Association has reiterated its advice to physicians around the world to take no part in implementing new eligibility regulations for classifying female athletes. The president of WMA said, "We have strong reservations about the ethical validity of these regulations. They are based on weak evidence from a single study, which is currently being widely debated by the scientific community. They are also contrary to a number of key WMA ethical statements and declarations, and as such, we are calling for their immediate withdrawal." Now, what the IF says in response to several letters being written, so one of the letters, I think this was the response to the WMA letter written to them. The IF is not a public authority exercising state powers, but rather a private body exercising private contractual powers. Therefore, it is not subject to human rights instruments such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the European Convention of Human Rights. Consistent with that, the IF notes that the Principle 1A of the Brighton plus Helsinki Declaration on Women in Sport that the letter cites places obligations on state and government, not on international sports federations like the IF. So we can do anything. And it really, you can't do anything to us. That's the message. Having said that, in my experience of working in the last 10 years, I have seen a change, and I've noticed a change. Because of Duti Chand's challenge, and later on Semenia's defines currently. I look at them as acts of disruption and confusion. Because I have traveled to several sports hostels, not only in the country, but I've met with athletes elsewhere in the world, in other parts of the global south. And I do see there is a willingness to understand the legal system, the legal structure, whether they have legal options. And that, I think, is a change. And that makes me believe that in some ways, the scrutiny that we used to talk about, scrutiny of young women athletes in general, how muscular they look, how long are their strides, etc., that scrutiny, which still exists, of course, but in some ways, we have been able to reverse that scrutiny. And that's quite a powerful thing. And that has been possible because of mainly these two athletes and leaders, I would say, Miss Chand and Miss Semenya. And that brings me back to the slide I showed you earlier in the very beginning of my presentation. And you see how the scrutiny in Daily Mail in 2009 has slightly changed over a period of time, where Semenya herself could talk about the IAF as treating her like a guinea pig. That was not the kind of language we were using earlier. I mean, it's not great that she had to say that. I wish she never had to endure what she had endured in the last 10 years. But this is in some ways a powerful change as well. Now, I was talking about what we all knew. And the story that I was talking about was actually, some of you who have followed this case very closely would already know. Now, what is it that we haven't been talking about? The hidden truth. The IF scientists published a paper in 2013. We call it the Fenichel paper. One of the scientists, the main scientist, who was one of the writers of that paper, Fenichel, Dr. Fenichel. They published this paper in 2013, and where they talk about investigating and conducting invasive and irreversible surgeries on 4 young women athletes, and I quote, from rural or mountainous regions of developing countries. And in another place in the same paper, they say rural and mountainous regions of countries with poor care. Poor care as in medical care. Well, what they're offering for these many years is worse than that. That is poor care. But anyways, perspectives are different, and it's time that we make this perspective the mainstream one. So having said that, this was quite something, because this is when they're accepting that this is what they are doing. It's on paper. This was not hidden in some ways anymore. And clearly it says that the surgeries were not for any health risk. So what was it for? It was to level the playing field. Now, what is this whole notion of the level playing field? The illusory level playing field. This is a letter, title of a letter written by some of these scientists who have been part of, the IAF and the IOC medical commissions. They wrote this letter to the Hastings report, who published a couple of articles on sex testing policies in 2010. And they talk about how well versed they are on this issue in the very beginning of the letter. I do have the letter with me, but I don't think I have time for that. So in that letter, which was written by Myron Janelle, Ine Jongvist, let me tell you, was part of the medical commission of the IOC for 25 years. And when he retired, he was the chair of the Medical Commission. He was also part of the IF Medical Commission for several years. So what they write there is the need to stress that though some may provide competitive advantage, fundamentally, it is no different than the advantage other athletes have because of their genetically endowed height or fast or slow twitch muscle ratio, or the misfortune of having a genetic disorder such as Marfan syndrome, which makes you thin and tall and have long kind of fingers and toes. So these kind of genetic disorders are, that's what medical science likes to call them, genetic disorders, are looked at, give athletes advantages. But they are well accepted. It's fine to have those kind of advantages. When it comes to high level of testosterone among women, then it becomes a question. Now, what Myron, Janelle, Youngwest are telling here clearly, and this is in connection to testosterone and certain forms of intersex variations. I would not like to discuss that too much at this point. I have 5 minutes. I'm still wondering if I should bargain. But so what they are saying here is this is no different, fundamentally not different from advantages one may have for testosterone. And I'm quoting not from one of these people who have been, critiquing the IF policies. I'm quoting from people who have been part of their medical commissions for 1/4 of a century. And then Tim Murray, who actually was part of their ethics commission, if I remember, ethics commission, and he also testified for the IF in Miss Chand's case, wrote in a paper in 2010, a fair sport competition does not require the athletes be equal in every imaginable respect. That's not what high performance sport is about. The high performance sport is about outliers. Am I going to be able to race with who? Who should I think of? Okay, Aggie Wilson. Sharda is sitting here. Will Sharda be able to race with Aggie Wilson? Have you ever dreamt of doing that? No. I mean, I have played badminton to some extent, but I never really, you have your limitations, and some people are outliers, and that's why they are there. And it's not only that's why I obviously agree that they have trained and they put in a lot of effort. Let's not deny that. But having said that, high performance sport is about exceptional athletes with exceptional traits, physical traits. And it's time we accept it, because even the people who have been running the show in these sport governing bodies accept it for years. I take you to this picture. On the side, you will see a picture which has young Miss Semenya with her friends. This is before she was being scrutinized, and she started seeing this different kind of a world of sport. And on this side, it's me with some of my friends. Clearly the one who is slightly androgynous in some ways. I joined sports at a very young age, but not something that I joined naturally. I joined sport because I was sent to a dance school where I was abused by my dance teacher's husband. And I felt pretending, trying to sort of dress up like a boy, trying to sort of, that was how I sort of coped with it. I thought about it at that age. I don't really believe in it now. But I came to sport because I felt I would be safer in sport. That's why I joined sport. and I stopped, going to the dance school where I was initially sent. Miss Semenya talks about how, if she ever has a child, she will be unsure whether she would want the child to compete in sport or take part in sport, because we don't see sports as a safe field anymore. Now the question is, what is more important? Is it leveling the playing field, where the notion of a level playing field is in itself illusory? Or is it providing our athletes with a safer playing field? If you ask me, from my experience of not only last 10 years, but probably from the time that you see me here in this picture, I would say I'll vote for a safer playing field any day. And I do have hope that most of you in this auditorium will agree with me. And that's where I will try and end it today, hoping that there are a lot of lawyers in this auditorium. What we have learned in the last 10 years, in what we have done, a lot of questions could be asked about whether court of arbitration for sport is the right place to go to, and we are really rethinking our strategies at this point about going back to Switzerland to fight our cases, whether it's the CAS or the Swiss Federal Tribunal. Those are things we need to discuss. But having said that, I think if there is a collective responsibility that has resulted in the progress that we have had, in some kind of a progress, whatever the process we have had from Dutee Chand to Miss Semenya's fight today. And I think it has been important that legal advocacy to accomplish social, institutional, and structural change has been important, and it will continue to be important. The law's focus on rights, equality, and justice can be used as a powerful tool to sway public opinion and to accomplish societal reform and stop institutionalized gender discrimination that we are seeing today. And I think at least that kind of a public opinion building has started for some time, and forming effective alliances to support legal challenges. And this I have seen myself in case of Dutee, where we were successful, and I hope we will be successful at some point with Miss Semenya too. I've been part of both the teams, and forming alliances between athletes, government officials, advocates, scholars, scientists, ethicists, media persons as well, across the world have been very important. And I believe the people who have gathered here are either one of these or a sports fan. And, there is some responsibility. I know I have to leave now. Okay, I know my time is out. You don't have to switch off the light. So I think it's our collective responsibility to sort of take this movement forward and ensure that sports is safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mitra. Any questions from the audience? Great. Can we get a mic across to her? No time? Okay. So we'll just do one question. And can we have the lights on Dr. Mitra, please? Doctor, you can come here and answer the question.
And the assumption of strength based on just higher levels of testosterone and sidelining other aspects, I think, is quite problematic. What is your opinion on that?
I think that was the presentation was about not singling out testosterone. And you talked about androgen insensitivity. I'm not a medical doctor, but yes, that is also part of, how do you measure androgen sensitivity of someone with a variation? No scientist would be able to give you a proper, satisfactory answer. It's very subjective. So this science is not foolproof. Their science, I call it bad science, but anyways, they call it, the best that they have. So I believe that's what I was trying to conclude with, that there are outliers, there are other kind of advantages which could be called fair or unfair. I mean, why singling out testosterone? I think that is what I was anyway talking about. No more questions, right?
Yeah. May I request Craig Foster, former Socceroos captain, commentator, and athletes' right activist, to please come on stage and present Dr. Mitra with a memento.